Good evening. My name is Robbie Luckett. I'm director of the Margaret Walker Center and a professor of history at Jackson State University. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this program tonight. Thanks to support from the Mississippi Humanities Council, the Margaret Walker Center at Jackson State University is hosting this conversation, Eviction, the intersection of policy, activism, and economic well-being, with Dr. Gwen Bouie-Haynes from the Mississippi chapter of the National Association of Social Workers, Matthew Campbell with the Mississippi NAACP, and Diane Standard from the Hope Policy Institute. This program is a part of a series of public events in conjunction with Evicted, an exhibition currently on display in the Johnson Hall Art Gallery at Jackson State. The exhibition will run through this Sunday, October the 3rd, 2021. We hope in this last week of its run at Jackson State, you will make plans to come see the exhibit, contact the Margaret Walker Center about more details, but we welcome you to come engage with this incredible exhibition that we've had for the last 15 weeks, thanks to the National Building Museum and support from the Mississippi Humanities Council. It is my great pleasure to introduce our panelists tonight. First, I will start with Dr. Gwen Bouie-Haynes, the Executive Director with the Mississippi Chapter of the National Association of Social Workers. With the NASW, she sits on the Council of Chapter Executives, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, and she was recently appointed by the NASW President to the Bylaws Committee in Washington, D.C. She is also a board member of the Mississippi Coalition Against Domestic Violence. She's an adjunct professor at Jackson State University in the Master of Social Work program, College of Health Sciences, and serves as co-chair for the Standards for Social Work Services, School of Social Work Services Revisions Task Force. Gwen is a graduate of Tougaloo College with a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology with an emphasis in mental health. She received her Master of Social Work degree from the University of Southern Mississippi and a Doctor of Philosophy degree in social work with a concentration in social policy, planning, and administration from Jackson State University. She is a licensed master-level social worker. Dr. Bouie-Haynes, thanks for joining us tonight. Our second panelist is Matthew Campbell, a native of Jackson. He is currently a community organizer for the Mississippi NAACP. His work for the state NAACP lies at the intersection of policy advocacy and grassroots organizing around issues such as criminal justice reform and housing. He's led civic engagement and issue campaigns across the state of Mississippi, such as the Mississippi NAACP's 2019 Criminal Justice Reform and District Attorney Accountability Campaign, and current work around access to quality, affordable housing. Matthew's previous experience includes working as a field and project director for local and statewide campaigns. In addition to his policy and advocacy experiences, he holds a Bachelor of Arts and a Master of Arts from Mississippi State University in political science. He lives in Jackson with his wife, Akita Campbell. Thanks, Matthew, for being here. And our final panelist, Diane Standard, is the Senior Vice President of Policy and Advocacy for Hope Enterprise Corporation, Hope Credit Union. In this role, she directs the Hope Policy Institute and provides leadership on the development and execution of Hope's policy and advocacy strategy. Diane brings more than 16 years of experience in policy deployment, along with a legal background in civil rights. She most recently served as Director of State Policy and Executive Vice President at the Center for Responsible Lending in Durham, North Carolina. She began her legal career as a fellow at the University of North Carolina Center for Civil Rights, and for several years, Diane served on the National Governing Committee for the American Bar Association's Forum on Affordable Housing and Community Development. Diane has presented testimony on issues of fair financial services in several state legislatures and in Congress, and she's worked with media such as the New York Times, National Public Radio, and the Los Angeles Times. She earned a BA in sociology from Florida State University and a JD from the University of North Carolina School of Law. Welcome, Diane. Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for being here, being a part of this important conversation, and thank you all for the work that you do. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to you
guys. Thanks, Dr. Luckett. I'll get us started here. And I just want to thank JSU, the Margaret Walker Center, for putting this panel together for this much needed conversation. And so what do you have here? Like Dr. Luckett gave his introduction, myself, Matthew Campbell with the Mississippi NAACP, Diane Standard with Hope Policy Institute, and Dr. Gwen Bouie-Haynes with the Mississippi chapter of the National Association of Social Workers. And so since I would say probably March or February, we've been working some of our cross-organizationally working to address the affordable housing crisis in Mississippi, the eviction crisis in Mississippi, which is an ongoing crisis. It's a pre-existing problem. And so we've been really working diligently as organizations, as individuals, to address this problem. And so we want to share some insight with those in the audience tonight about some of the work that we've done, what lies ahead, and some of the problems that Mississippians all across this state have experienced with housing instability, with this current affordable housing crisis. And so I'll start off. I just want to note that Mississippi has one of the highest housing insecurity rates in the nation. And according to the U.S. Census, their household survey, over 28,000 Mississippians fear they could be evicted within the next 2 months. And 52% of those households are households with children under 18. And so we're in a crisis. We're in an affordable housing crisis. We're in an eviction crisis. And over the past month or so, our organization, the Mississippi NAACP, Dr. Gwen's organization, have hosted a number of rental assistance application clinics across the state. And so at our most recent clinic last week in Meridian, we met a young lady who had just received an eviction notice. And she had a small child, and she didn't know what she was going to do. All right, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm about to be on the street next week. What should I do? And the reason why I bring that up is because where we live, housing affects pretty much every aspect of our lives. It impacts health outcomes. It impacts educational outcomes, where kids that suffer from homelessness or housing instability receive lower educational attainment. And people that suffer from housing instability, both adults and children, suffer from more adverse health outcomes. And we would be amiss if we did not talk about the racial disparities and the gender disparities associated with housing instability, where African Americans and other marginalized groups and communities of color are more likely to be evicted, and women are more likely to be evicted than men. And so we're in a crisis. This is an emergency situation. And, I just want to commend, before we really dive deep into this conversation, all of the groups across the state that have worked diligently to help solve this problem, to help, not only identify short-term fixes, but to also identify long-term sustainable solutions to this affordable housing crisis. And on that note, I'll turn it over to Dr. Gwen and Diane.
Thank you, Matthew, so very much. And this opportunity to weigh in on this conversation of policy, activism, and economic well-being of individuals across the various communities of Mississippi. We've had a wonderful experience of working as a collective with organizations such as Matthew's organization, the NAACP, and also the Hope Policy Institute as well. The National Association of Social Workers has been also involved with the Children Defense Fund Regional Office, and also the Southern Rural Black Women's Initiative, which is a part of the Children Defense Fund. And just to weigh in further on what Matthew has talked about in terms of the impact of evictions across the state of Mississippi and those individuals that are impacted so very desperately across Mississippi, we began this process as well as part of an organizational collective for the purpose of, because we knew from various meetings that people in rural and underserved communities, unserved communities or inadequately served communities where there may have been Black and brown people that actually they were not getting access to the housing applications across the state of Mississippi. And so, as part of our mission and our effort, it was to ensure that communities somehow was given the access. So we began this collective looking at communities. But what we found was uniquely very challenging. And that is, there was a grave impact on communities as it relates to families and also children as well. What does that look like when you're going into communities and you're presented with a mother and two children who have received a recent eviction notice and they will have no place to live in a few days? You're on site providing that assistance to the families. How do you ensure that this family has the access that is needed to have a place to stay? What actual impact does this have on the children who are school-aged children who are faced with the challenges of going to their classroom on a daily basis and being asked to perform? Being asked to perform at an educational level where other children are also performing as well. This is a very, very, very difficult challenge within the communities that we have been in thus far. We have seen many stories that we could share of those individuals, not only families and individuals and children within communities, but we've seen those persons who present to us with disabilities. And what might that look like for individuals with disabilities? Someone who is visually impaired, who may not have the visual capacity to fill out the application. We knew as a group of organizations that we had to respond to the needs based on what Matthew just said. This is a crisis within our communities, and we had to respond to those needs based upon what we knew was going on from the clinics that we were actually doing across the state of Mississippi. And because it was important to respond to the needs, we see this not only as a crisis, but we see this also as a human rights crisis as well. We see this as a public health crisis that ultimately will lead to more homelessness across communities in the state of Mississippi. And so we've had an opportunity to gain experiences from different communities. And we've found great, just really, really great strength in the communities that we have gone into. Much resilience, but yet we have found much stress as well in communities where there are families concerned about, will I have a place to stay the next day? How will I meet the utility bill for my home, what I call as home? And so with the travel that we've had regarding the implementation of rental assistance clinics, it's been related to much of the policy in the state related to the clinic. So let me just step back in time a little bit. Is that Mississippi, of course, received funding for rental assistance. And because the state received funding for rental assistance, this money was provided to an organization for the purpose of ensuring that people had access. And as we will share a little further in our conversation, we want to just delve into whether or not the policy itself lines up with what the actual needs are within the community. So I'll stop here and hand the floor over to Diane.
Great. I think you have both been commenting on what brought your organizations to this work and what's brought so many other our colleagues to this work over the last few months. So I just want to start there and talk about why HOPE as a policy institute, why HOPE as a Black-led credit union here in the Deep South, why we have jumped in to this crisis of evictions. We weren't addressing this issue of evictions prior to March of this year. And so it has been part of our crisis response mode and in the response to the impacts of the pandemic. When we think about who has been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, we know that has been low-income communities, it's Black communities, Latino communities that are bearing the burden of both the public health consequences and the economic consequences in terms of unemployment rates and small business closures, difficulty accessing relief funds. So we knew exactly who was going to be at the center of the eviction crisis. And that was going to be the communities that we serve and that we are in. And so HOPE is in the business of closing gaps and closing opportunity gaps for the future and making sure people have an opportunity for economic mobility, regardless of where they were born or who they are or where they live. And a huge pathway for us to do that is through small business ownership and home ownership. If we care about those long-term goals and pathways to closing the racial wealth gap, we have to care about what's happening with evictions right now, because the crisis that is happening with evictions has a potential to entrench a two-tiered class system of where people live in this country for a long time, because the scars cut so deep and for a long time of what happens with evictions. And so, when we talk about the wealth gap and why that is important of interest, I think people may know that there is already a very wide wealth gap between Black families and white families in this country and in the state, roughly 10 to 1. For every $1 of wealth held by a Black family, $10 are held by white families. But when you look at households with children, that jumps from 100 to 1. And so this is exactly who is being affected by the eviction crisis as well. And the stakes are so high. It is an emergency crisis we must address right now, because if we do not, the long-term impacts are going to reverberate for generations. And so I just want to put a few of those long-term consequences out slightly and then turn it back over to Matthew to talk about what have been some of the response efforts and the money and other things that we've been talking about. But the long-term consequences of evictions are not only for the individual families and the people, the costs that they bear of, Mississippi is one of the states with the most strict eviction laws. It's one of the few states in the country where you can, on the same day that a judge orders the eviction, on that very same day, they can remove your property and they can remove you from your home. And that is because of a law that the state legislature passed. So that is the severe immediate consequences and the cost of losing all of your things, finding a new place to live, trying to make ends meet as you deal with unexpected homelessness. The other costs are long-term. An eviction stays on somebody's credit report for 7 years. So, we know credit reports are used for finding jobs, insurance, all of these things. So this eviction will last much, much longer than probably the pandemic itself. And then we know, what is a question that every landlord asks when looking for a new place to live? Have you ever been evicted? And so back to Gwen's question of the spillover effects of homelessness and really where are people going to go? If this was a hurricane coming to our shores and we were facing the mass displacement of what Matthew said of 28,000 families, we would have mass mobilization of making sure people had a place to stay and were housed and were safe. And that is the same scale of displacement that we're facing here, with no option of where else will people go because of the barriers that an eviction will put in their way when they try to move forward from this. And so for us, it is dealing with, we have to be part of this solutions, both in the urgent, immediate need, and in long term, and so incredibly thankful for the work of all the organizations across the state who have been jumping in to make sure Mississippians can stay housed at this time and hopefully for the long term. So I'll turn it over to Matthew to talk about, what have been some of the response efforts been, the money, what we've been doing sort of since that time.
Yeah, thanks, Diane. Just to start off that question, there are currently 3 rental assistance programs in the state. And so all 3 programs were created under the Consolidated Appropriations Act, which was passed by U.S. Congress last year in December. And so the state of Mississippi was allocated $200 million for rental assistance. The state of Mississippi received $186 million, and 2 counties in the state, because of population, Harrison and Hinds County, received their own allocation. Hinds County received $7 million, and Harrison County received a little over $6 million. And so all 3 programs launched around the same time, March, mid-March, late March, somewhere in there. And so what we've seen since the inception of these programs is a very slow rollout of those rental assistance funds. Like Diane and Gwen have both stated, there's a dire need for these funds across the state. Like I mentioned earlier, over 28,000 people in the state of Mississippi fear they could be evicted within the next 2 months. And so there's a dire need. But that demand has not matched the rate at which these funds have rolled out. And so that's where we've stepped in as advocacy organizations, as policy advocates, to really find a way to expedite the release of some of these funds on the state level as well as the local level. And so some of the work that we've done has included making recommendations to program administrators on how they could develop a more intimate relationship with community organizations and with community itself to expedite the release of those funds, to make sure that every community need is met, because we have a major problem in the state of Mississippi with access. When you look at the state program, when the program was first rolled out, it was primarily an online program. But a lot of people across the state of Mississippi have problems with access to Wi-Fi. Some folks don't have computers at home. And so a major barrier exists for a lot of people across the state who need that assistance, but have no way to access an application. And so we've pushed for a paper application at the very beginning of this program. And we've also pushed for an application process that's less cumbersome, that includes less verbiage and terminology that confuses applicants from across the state who might not necessarily understand what they're reading. And so we've pushed for some of those changes. And so a big part of the work that we've done as advocacy organizations have been rental assistance applications. We understand that the best way to reach community is to be in community, is to touch folks that are directly impacted. And so we've tried to do that across the state. Over the past month or 2, we've held a number of rental assistance applications. Like Dr. Gwen stated earlier, it's been a collective effort. And Dr. Gwen's organization, as well as the Southern Rural Black Women's Initiative, they've held rental assistance applications across the state. Our organization, the Mississippi NAACP, we've done the same. And we've recognized the need. We've recognized that thousands of people across the state are hurting. And so what I'll do is I'll post the information about each program in the chat. So each person that's watching live will be able to see information about those programs. You'll be able to share information about those programs. I'll post a website as well as the phone number that you can call to reach some of the program administrators of those programs. But back to the slow rollout of some of those funds. The latest Treasury compliance report for these three programs, the state of Mississippi received 186 million. Only 18 million of that 186 million has been spent as of August. The Hinds County program received 7 million. 900,000 of that 7 million has been spent as of August. And in Harrison County received a little over 6 million, and they've spent 5 million as of August of the 6 million that they received. And so we're continuing to identify strategies and ways to make sure that we're connected to community, making sure that community receives these funds, and really find a way to make sure that the program administrators understand the dire need, understand the expediency in which they must move, and the sense of urgency, because people are hurting, and we have to recognize that, and we have to move in accordance with that. And I'll pass it on to you, Ms. Dr. Gwen Bouie-Haynes.
Thank you, Matthew. I'd like to just sort of provide context of, exactly what's happening as we roll out the opportunities to fill out applications for rental assistance across communities. And basically everything that we have done thus far, it's been intentional. And so let us gravitate for a minute regarding the community itself. The state of Mississippi, we have a great opportunity to do some good here as it relates to the well-being of families and also children and individuals as well. And I see that as a strength of the state of Mississippi. And we have a great opportunity to depend on the trusted voices of people who live and reside in Mississippi to ensure access to the application process and rental assistance applications. Then thirdly, I want to say that our work has been intentional from the very beginning and the very standpoint that we want to make a difference in the lives of those individuals where you see a significant gap in resources, a significant gap in wages, a significant gap in the type of housing that people live in, whether it's safe, affordable, decent housing. Everything that we have really wanted as part of this process has been about activism. And so activism come from the perspective of knowing what your overall mission and goal is here. And that is, we do not want not one single family to end up in a homeless situation. We want to ensure that everyone has access to the resources that might be needed, whether it's utility assistance, whether it's rental assistance, or whether there might be some other compelling need. But for sure, we want people to stay in what we identify as their home, their environment, that they consider their safety net. We have done an awesome job, I think, as part of this effort, getting out to social media and also reaching across communities, reaching across those organizations that normally might not be advocating together as an organization, which further demonstrates the resiliency of communities across the state of Mississippi. And so because there's
I'm going to go ahead and pick up where Gwen was talking about in terms of what's been happening at the clinic and other ways we can shore up. She said, we want to make sure that not a single family ends up homeless, and so we agree. And so this is where we're in a situation where there's many evictions that are happening that should not be happening for a couple of reasons. One, we have money. We have an answer to this solution right here in the state. That's the $200 million that is here in Mississippi as we speak and has been rolling out and should be rolling out faster and can be getting to families and to landlords prior to evictions. And so that's the thing I think we wanted to clarify, that this rental assistance of money is available to both tenants and to landlords. But if someone gets evicted, neither can benefit from that money. So we have this, this is not an unsolvable problem. We have the tools available to prevent these unnecessary evictions and keep people housed. And the other element that we've been working on to make sure people are not unnecessarily evicted is, making sure that people have the ability to exercise their rights in court. If you've ever watched eviction court, many of them are virtual. If you've ever been, very rarely are people have access to an attorney to help assert their rights, to make sure that an eviction was done in accordance with the law. And so that is another important point of intervention for us, that if we can increase the access to legal counsel for people facing eviction, that becomes a really helpful way to make sure people are not unnecessarily kicked out of the place that they live. Just to provide one example that we have seen and how it interacts with the rental assistance application is, we were watching court one day, and a landlord showed up asking for the ability to evict his tenant, and said to the judge, well, I know my tenant has already applied to the rental assistance program, but I'm not giving the program my information. Even if I got the money, I'd return the money. I don't want it. And the judge ordered the eviction anyway. So here's an example where someone had done all of the right things to get access to the help they need, but facing an uncooperative landlord who didn't want to also benefit from this money. And this is just one of many challenges that we think can be helped resolved through the courts. And so we're thankful to the Mississippi Volunteer Lawyers Project, the Access to Justice Commission, the Mississippi Center for Justice, and the Housing Clinic at the University of Mississippi, and the Mississippi Central Legal Services that are right now at work trying to amplify and create a mechanism to increase the amount of counsel and availability of attorneys to people facing eviction, and which everyone will benefit the more that these evictions are reduced. So I think we just want to note that there is some inclement weather here in Jackson, and so Gwen Dr. Bouie-Haynes has lost her power at the moment. So we'll hope that she is staying safe, and Matthew and I will keep talking, and hopefully if she's able to join, we'll bring her back in. But I think, I'm going to turn it back over to Matthew to share some other things, I think, about how we've all sort of jumped into this crisis. Oh, great. Dr. Bouie-Haynes is coming back. But to share how, as we've jumped into this eviction crisis, we've realized that this eviction crisis is colliding into an already pre-existing housing crisis that people already have been struggling with. So I'll turn it back over to Matthew from here.
Yeah, thanks, Diane. So I want to provide a little historic context because at a lot of these rental assistance applications that we've hosted, we've encountered people that are in rent-to-own situations. And so historically, if you examine how African Americans and other marginalized groups were systemically denied access to government-backed mortgage programs, traditional mortgage loan programs, and just limited in where they could live. Rent to own was often the only alternative that a lot of Black families had. And so that is a pre-existing problem that we still see today. It's a predatory relationship. It's always been used as a means to exploit low-income families. And it's something that we've seen across the state at these rental assistance clinics, where a lot of people are in these rent-to-own situations, and they're in need of relief. But I also think some pre-existing challenges that we've seen across the state is just the inability of I would say state leadership to positively identify solutions to mitigate housing instability in the state of Mississippi. I was reading earlier that Charlotte, North Carolina, their city council recently approved $23 million through their housing trust fund to build more affordable housing across the city of Charlotte. And so recently, I think that was earlier this year, HUD allocated $700 million to the National Housing Trust Fund. $4 million of that goes to the state of Mississippi, which isn't nearly enough to cover all of the existing affordable housing issues that we have in the state of Mississippi. But it'll be interesting to know just exactly how the state of Mississippi plans to tap into some of those resources, some of the resources that are coming down from the federal government, and whether or not there's been a concerted effort from some in state leadership to make sure that we leverage some of those federal resources to address some of these existing challenges and issues that we have with affordable housing across the state of Mississippi. And so I think that, this program that we're looking at is a short-term fix. Once the money is gone, it's gone. And so we have to begin to think about long-term sustainable solutions and strategies to address the problem. And so when we look at the shortage of rental units across the state of Mississippi, there's a shortage of over 42,000 rental units for extremely low-income families in the state of Mississippi. Extremely low-income families are families that have a median area income at or below the average income in their area. And so there's a shortage of 42,000 affordable, available rental units in the state of Mississippi for those families. That's a problem. And it's been an ongoing problem. It predates the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we have to address that. And so we have to be proactive in our thinking and in our strategy making, and in the way we move to address this issue. And so, I'm pleased with the work that we've been able to do as advocacy partners, as a collective, to address some of these disparities and to help mitigate housing instability. But I also think that there has to be action at every level of government, whether it be federal, state, or local, to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to identify solutions to this problem. And so, that's just one of the things that, that just crossed my mind, and I just thought I would throw out there. But, it's a historic problem. It's a problem that has existed for decades in the state of Mississippi. It's a problem that has existed for decades across the country. In low wealth, low income communities, African-American communities have been disproportionately impacted by this mass scale crisis. And so we have to be cognizant of that. And I also think when we're talking about affordable housing, that we also have to include income and wealth disparities in our analysis, because housing costs have outpaced wage and income growth. And so if folks can't support themselves economically, it's hard to generate housing stability in the state of Mississippi. And so that's another avenue or another issue that we also have to target and consider when we're talking about housing instability in the state of Mississippi, is the fact that Mississippi is a low income state. It is a low wage state, and that impacts people's ability to not be cost burdened, to not be severely cost burdened, and to be able to afford housing costs and other necessities that they not only need to survive, but to also thrive. And so I just thought that I'll throw that out there, and I'll pass it on to y'all.
So Matthew, this is Gwen. I'm back on the platform. I've had to improvise here, and so I'm on my front porch at this point because I have no lights in my house. So if I drop off, that's the reason that I've dropped off. Thank you for filling in the gap, because I think the conversation that you we're having is exactly where I was going regarding activism, and just how important it is that we continue to involve and engage communities. And so I was sharing before I lost connection, I was sharing from the perspective that as we went into communities, we tried to desperately identify those leaders within each community for the purpose of giving this ownership of community empowerment to individuals within their own environment. And so, with that being the case, we were actively involved in identifying social workers within communities. There were leaders also. We've had legislative representatives involved in their own communities, ensuring that constituents got the needed access to resources. And we've also had the faith-based community involved as well, which is so critical in some of your rural communities, because it may be the only person that you have in a 20-mile radius is your faith-based community. And that has been important because the faith-based community are leaders as it relates to the kind of work that we're doing with the rental assistance application process. And so I'd say as part of the clinics that we've done thus far, we're going to continue these, but as Matthew has said, this is not a long-term kind of thing. That's why it's so important to get leaders to take on the ownership of the next steps as it relates to this work. I think that's where I was before I got disconnected, Diane. So if you will take the floor away.
Well, I'm so glad you're back and safe, and improvising has been a good theme, I think, of our work since March overall. So perfect. This is, I think as we think about long-term solutions and to the other, again, this eviction crisis is colliding onto other crises of COVID, racism, economic inequality for a long time. And so I think for hope and for the collective work, part of the long-term work is, making sure people are have what they need before disaster strikes, and making sure that people have the ability to save and have a cushion to withstand an unexpected shock. These are the things that this is wealth. This is why building wealth is important, so that people are not faced with homelessness when faced with an unexpected loss of income, especially to the scale of what COVID has brought. Many people were experiencing even since the Great Recession. And so, that's where we want to continue to contribute, is making sure that there's policies in place that people have the ability to be economically secure and have the lives they want to have, even in the face of disaster. And for us, that is making sure, if renting is such a high barrier, we need to have policies in place that promote home ownership, that account for those barriers that renters are facing, and there's still a pathway forward. The other element is, I just want to close, I think, before opening up to question and answer around the strength of community that, Gwen, you were mentioning, and Matthew, I think you said the best way to touch community is to be in community. And the way that this has been our collective approach to this work, and that should be a central theme for all the federal dollars that are starting to come down the pike through the American Rescue Plan, through any additional money that the state has to distribute, that Congress has distributed, is making sure that these resources get to the communities most impacted by these challenges, and to the communities and leaders, Dr. Bouie-Haynes, what you were talking about, that know their communities, know who needs it, know how to get it out. And the best way for these dollars to change communities is to be in community. And I think that maybe is a central theme as we think about how to solve these multitude of solutions or problems and challenges that we've been facing in the long term. So I will open it up. I think Robbie is going to open up for question and answers for us. Robbie, I think you might be muted.
Gwen, we're so glad you're safe and okay and here and committed to this work and all the wonderful things you're doing. We do have a number of really great questions that are in the chat, and I would encourage people who are watching on Facebook and YouTube to keep them coming. And I want to start with one we got pretty early on from Lacey Davis. How can I find out if a rental clinic will be in my area? Anybody want to take that one?
I guess I'll answer that one. So Lacey, you have a number of community organizations that are hosting rental assistance clinics. We've hosted a number of them. Dr. Gwen's organization has hosted a number of them. And so we've tried our best to publicize those events. And so one of the things that we've done is, we create a calendar of those events. We try to push it out through community. And so if Lacey could provide us with where she lives, that would be great.
And I'm sure these guys will be willing to share their contact information, email addresses, and ways to get in touch with them so they can share that information.
We also have 2 coming up. One in Hattiesburg tomorrow from 4 to 7. And then another one is being organized in Vicksburg on October 2nd. So look out for details from there.
Got another kind of extensive question, and be interested to see your reaction to: can Hinds County lose the funds if they're not distributed by a certain date? And can the funds be used to boost community organizing around raising awareness and making the applications accessible?
Diane, that might be a question for you. What do you think?
I'll take a stab and let others weigh in.
Right.
So technically, Treasury, when the creation of the rental assistance program, did provide an opportunity for Treasury if they decided to come in and help reallocate funds for underperforming programs anywhere in the country. So that date is coming up on September 30th. So it's, I don't have any insight onto what Treasury will or will not do. I know Hinds County and some of the partners working with the Hinds County program are making tremendous strides to improve and continue to roll out the funds. And, I think what's clear is we know those funds are still needed here in the state of Mississippi, and in Hinds County for sure. One thing about how the funds are currently structured is that the funds can only be given to state government agencies or their subcontractors to actually deploy. There is actually a bill in Congress pending right now that would change how the program is structured so that maybe underperforming programs, those resources could stay in the state, but reallocated to non-governmental agencies to help ensure the deployment. But that will depend on what Congress is doing. But I think the key key focus is we still need that money. We still need it here in Hinds County. We still need it in Mississippi, and we hope that that will remain.
And Diane, I'd like to add also to that question as well, that this money is going to be around until about 2025. And so while there's money now that's available, there will be a new round of money coming out. Can the money be used for community organizing? Oh my, we wish that it could, but the money is specifically earmarked for rental assistance and utility assistance across the state.
Yeah, and I think for that second round of funding, there might be a little more flexibility with how program administrators can use those funds. But I think that it has to be, of course, housing related, like affordable housing purposes, counseling purposes for folks facing eviction. It has to be used for those type of services. But I don't think it could be used to support any type of direct organizing on a community level from nonprofit organizations or anything like that.
Thanks for that. That's all very helpful. In a similar vein, someone who actually knows quite a bit about this issue, Bill Bynum, the founder of HOPE, asked, why was Harrison County so much more effective in deploying the funds?
Matthew, do you want to take that one?
Okay, I'll jump in. So the program administrator for the Harrison County program, Open Doors, we were able to develop an early working relationship with them, with both of our branches on the coast, the Biloxi branch, as well as the Gulfport branch. And so they've been really open to community, making sure that they engage and involve community in the process. And I think early on, they recognized that in order to get these funds out, to make sure people receive the relief that they need, they had to be in some type of intimate setting with community, where they were actively engaging folks pretty much every day in community settings to make sure that they get those funds out. So I think that's one of the reasons why Harrison County has been so successful, is because you have a local group that's able to touch people directly and intimately every day. They're able to arrange appointments with people to meet their specific needs. Whatever barriers they face, they're able to meet folks where they are. And so I think that's probably why they've been so successful at deploying those funds.
And Matthew, I'd like to add as well that the county has actual experience in working with homelessness within their own community. And aside from that experience in working with homelessness, they knew early on that it took a lot of planning ahead of time. And so there's that whole notion of processing applications and how quickly they're moving that process through their system, which seems to be one of those challenges in communities that we have been in across the state of Mississippi.
I know that one of my colleagues at Jackson State, Dr. Sade Turnipseed, is watching tonight with some of her students, and it appears that one of her graduate students has posted a question to you guys. And I think that the sense of it, who is actually over the program to make sure this money is being distributed? Who is specifically responsible and to whom?
I can take a stab at that. So as Matthew mentioned, there's 3 program administrators administering this money here in the state of Mississippi. The statewide program, the RAMP program with $186 million to distribute is Mississippi Home Corporation. And then in Hinds County and Harrison County, they have their own programs that they're administering. So each of those agencies have the responsibility to administer those funds in compliance with federal law. Ultimately, at the federal level, it is the U.S. Treasury that does have sort of oversight and compliance and accountability responsibilities to make sure states are deploying the funds correctly, efficiently, and getting them to where they need to go. I don't know if others want to add in to that.
Yeah, I'd just like to add in, Diane, that in getting the money from the Department of Treasury to the state of Mississippi, then the governor has the oversight to determine the administering agency, and that administering agency is the organization responsible for the overall program. There is an organization or a group that's responsible for the processing of the applications, just to add to your comment.
I want to add one where Dr. Bouie-Haynes, your comment mentioned who has responsibility, who has oversight. I just want to, this is our money. This is taxpayer dollars. This is when we talk about who has accountability, we all have a vested interest in knowing where this money's going, how it's being spent. And so, we encourage you to follow along with how it's going to happen in the future. This is our money. This is your money. And we have ownership in making sure it gets used to help our neighbors and help the people we care about.
Absolutely. That's an excellent point, Diane. These are public dollars, and we as the public have a right to see that these funds are spent properly. And related to that, Angela Stewart asked, how can we hold the people responsible for dispersing the money accountable and make sure the funds get to the people who need them? So how do we do that in practice?
I'll take a stab at this one, and I do think that it relates to much of what we have already talked about this evening, and that is it really takes true activism and collective voices across the state to ensure that the monies are distributed. If there are challenges or barriers, we must say that the organization that we've been working with, MHC, has been very, very accommodating, trying to work out those difficulties with the application. So we are the voices as organizations, and I must say that all of the organizations that are involved with ensuring that the monies are expended, we're actually not sub-grantee organizations. We're organizations within the community who have a strong commitment and desire to keep pushing to ensure that the monies are dispersed across the state.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And as the Mississippi NAACP, we're a membership-based organization, so we have membership all across the state. And so the work that we do, the type of community action that we're engaged in, reflects the views and the policy interests and community interests of that membership base. And so, I think that, organizationally, we talk about organizations. We often talk about organizations as a single entity, right? That has its own agenda, that has its own policy, ambitions, and goals. But no, an organization is a collective of individuals from all across the state that help formulate and establish what that policy agenda should be, what that agenda should be for community. And so, and then you use your voice as one organization to kind of advocate for some of those changes. And so I think that, that's what we've done. What Dr. Gwen Bouie-Haynes has said is that we get paid to do this work. A lot of folks that are at home that are volunteers might not have the time or the chance to talk to MHC about policy recommendations. But we do, right? We can relate a message. That's our role as community advocates, as policy advocates, is to relay a message, is to represent those community interests, be reflective of those community interests. And that's how we hold power accountable, that's how we hold the state accountable. Is if we reflect those community interests in our work.
I have loved how your responses have segued nicely into other questions. And we have another one from Dr. Turnipseed's class where Siobhan Bailey asks, what can we do to support and assist the efforts of your organizations if we reside here in Mississippi or even out of state?
One of the things I was thinking, Matthew, as you were talking, unfortunately, I'm getting farther and farther in the dark here, but I'm leaning forward. So I hope that you can continue to hear me. But one of the things that I was thinking about is that we can always use those volunteers at the clinics and train volunteers on how to complete the online application and or the paper application. So volunteers can always be used at the clinics. And this is a real commitment that extends beyond the organizations, perhaps students volunteering to assist with this effort. We're all over the state. And so NASW as well as NAACP have both been training individuals as we go into communities. Sometimes the volunteers are a little bit reluctant regarding the application process, but once we are there and we do the actual training, it's relatively smooth for us to go through. However, those persons that we are assisting across communities need us to be a voice.
Yeah, and I would say our biggest friend when we're trying to spread the word, disseminate the message about these rental assistance clinics is word of mouth. Is that old traditional Southern organizing tactic of relational organizing, that people listen to folks they know and that they trust, and if they're hearing from a reliable voice, a trusted voice about this organization hosting a rental assistance clinic or this organization doing this in the community, folks are more inclined to participate in that event. And so, even if you don't have time to volunteer at a rental assistance clinic, you can use your voice to help elevate that message, to help elevate the word about these different events that we have across the state, that we post on all these different mediums, whether it be Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, or whether it be a mass email that we send out. I think the more we're able to touch people, the more folks are able to hear from people that they know about these rental assistance clinics, and even folks, because I think when we talk about it, that there's also an element of hesitancy among a lot of people across the state, where they might need help, but might not necessarily want to be seen out in public at this type of event. But if they're talking to people that they know, and if they show up with somebody that they know, they might feel more comfortable actually coming to receive assistance. So I think that that's important too. It's just using the power that we have as people, that we have as individuals, to touch one another and reach one another to make sure that we receive the help that we need.
I want to add one more to that around the power that we have as people in getting the word out. One is, I think, Mississippi NAACP's on Twitter and Facebook, Hope Policy Institute's on Twitter, the Southern Rural Black Women's Initiative is on Twitter. If you're watching this, please go follow at least those. There's others, follow us. That's where we put a lot of word out and helpful for the long term. But, where we have, advocates, power as people is also everyone watching this is an advocate. You have an elected official, a city council person, a state legislature, a governor, a Congress member. These are things you can be talking to them about. Do they know what's going on with the rental assistance where you live? Are they helping get the word out? Are they asking questions about the status of the deployment of these funds? Are they helping ensure that people are, not being unnecessarily evicted in this crisis. These are questions you can ask them, and you should be asking them. And those will be very, very helpful efforts to amplify the work that is going on in the ground. Because again, this is a crisis that we all have a stake in, and these dollars that are being deployed to solve the crisis is our money. And so we invite you to be advocates in your communities as well on these issues.
Okay, let's close out with one final question here. What are your long-term solutions and strategies that you believe these funds should be applied to if the political will was there?
I'll start off, and I think my other colleagues jump in as well. Sustainability plan going forward certainly addresses the need for rental assistance money to be there, to be available to those individuals that need it most. And I think having a sustainability plan for the long term that specifically deals with, we've talked about those communities where they had high utility bills. We've been in communities where people had utility bills as high as $700 in some instances, and they had also coupled with that the actual rent for their housing. And we've been in some communities where the rent has been so high that they are paying on the rent in order to have a place to stay. So their rent is still behind. So ideally, having a sustainability plan is what's needed, but we want to make sure that this money is spent for rent and utilities because that's what we see as the need in communities.
Yeah, and I think I might have mentioned earlier about the second round of funding, how there might be a little more flexibility in how states are able to spend some of those funds. And so, I think any way we can, we have to find a way to apply more funds to help build or create more affordable housing. Like I mentioned, there's a shortage of affordable housing units across the country. I think the National Low Income Housing Coalition estimates that there's about a 7 million shortage for low income families across the nation. And like I said earlier, over 42,000 rental unit shortage in the state of Mississippi. And so I think any resources that we could identify to help us figure out, okay, how do we supply people with more quality, more affordable housing? Is I think the sure way to go. Because when we talk about all of your negative outcomes, whether it be educational outcomes and children that receive low educational attainment or adverse health outcomes, all of that is correlated, comes back is linked essentially to where those folks live, the type of the quality housing that they live in. And so we have to find a way to invest for there to be an active investment in affordable housing in the state of Mississippi. If we don't, we'll continue to have a housing crisis. We'll continue to have an affordable housing crisis because 2025 will probably be here before we know it. And we'll no longer be talking about an emergency rental assistance program, but we'll still have the same pre-existing problems that we've had for decades if we don't see some type of action. If we don't see some consistent, concerted effort to make sure that the state and local governments have the resources that they need to conduct or to build or create more affordable housing. And so, I talked about the $700 million through the National Housing Trust Fund, which was allocated by HUD. The state was allocated $4 million of that. And so we need a more robust effort. And so, I think that's something that's worth fighting for, that we continue to work on. But we need a more robust, a more active investment in affordable housing in this state, and also find a way to put more money in people's pocket. I mean, that's essentially what it boils down to. If we don't find a way to help create more sustainable economic opportunity, how we can induce economic upward mobility in the state of Mississippi, we'll come back to the same situation 10 years from now, where we have almost 50% of renter households in Mississippi that are cost burden, that spend 30% or more of their income on housing costs. And we'll have the same situation where housing costs continue to outpace income and wage growth. And so, I think that's what we have to do to really work on some of those strategies and solutions to help mitigate this problem.
Matthew, I want to add to what you've also said as well, that we have to, in terms of a sustainability plan, ensure that the policies that are developed at a national level, a local, state, or a national level, that they line up with what the actual economic needs are within the communities. For example, someone is in a family situation who has been evicted and is couch surfing, maybe with another family member, might not be eligible for this money because they do not have a current lease that can be supported to demonstrate that they need housing. So I think it's important also to ensure that the policies line up with what the actual economic needs might be for someone who's been evicted or who might be in a homeless situation.
That's right. Yeah. And that's an excellent point, because for folks like that, especially for people, because Mississippi is an intergenerational state where you might have people from multiple generations living in the same household. And that person, like Ms. Gwen said, might not have a lease to show that, hey, I live here. But that person still suffers from housing instability, and it's hard for them to access those funds. And so we have to find a way to quantify that, and also find a way to make sure that those type of people who've essentially been locked out of this program, that fall in that gap, are also able to receive some type of relief and assistance.
All right, y'all. This has been a fabulous conversation. I'm so glad to see the great engagement from our wonderful audience and the people who've been watching tonight on YouTube and Facebook. Diane, Gwen, Matthew, thank you for the work that you do, for the contributions that you make through your organizations, through HOPE, through the National Association of Social Workers in the Mississippi chapter and the Mississippi NAACP. Grateful for all of you, and grateful for your time tonight, especially Dr. Bouie-Haynes, through your trials and tribulations, but it looks like your electricity is back on. You at least had some kind of lighting back there.
It's back on. We are in business now. And so I think that's a good segue to say that, if we had to look at an analogy of how people feel without utilities, these are the very families that are facing no utilities. Lights are turned off. But in this instance, my lights are back on. But just think about children who are studying who may not have that opportunity. I'm back on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I want to just take a moment to once again thank the Mississippi Humanities Council, whose support has made all of this possible. They have made the programming, the wonderful public events that we have had, all of which you can find on our Facebook and YouTube pages. You guys can share these conversations that we're having with your social media. Please help spread the word. Go back and see some of the past events. Share this conversation. As part of that funding, of course, the Mississippi Humanities Council is responsible for helping us bring the exhibit Evicted to the Jackson State campus, where it has been for the past 15 weeks. You can learn more about the exhibit at the website I just posted. It is open for the rest of this week. It closes on Sunday. So if you would like to see it, come to Jackson State, the Johnson Hall Art Gallery. It is a powerful exhibition, three-dimensional exhibit built around these houses, telling the story of eviction across the country. Really a wonderful, engaging way to learn more about this issue. And we would invite you to contact us and come up to campus and see it before it leaves and moves on. So thanks to the Mississippi Humanities Council for making that possible as well. As part of our funding, we do ask that you fill out our online evaluation. You can see the link to the form there on Facebook and YouTube. It's incredibly helpful for us for our reporting to the Humanities Council and for us to learn about the programming that we're offering and the work that we're doing through the Margaret Walker Center at Jackson State. With that said, I'll let the panelists offer any closing comments you guys might have before we leave for the evening.
Matthew.
Yeah, well, I just want to thank, once again, thank you, Dr. Luckett. I want to thank JSU and the Margaret Walker Center. This is an invaluable conversation, especially if you consider the time that we're in right now. And so just want to really thank you for that. We really appreciate the work that you've done to put this together. And also, I think I speak for Ms. Gwen and, as well as Diane, when I say that, really happy and excited about the members in the audience that really asked some great questions. Looking forward to seeing some of y'all to help us continue some of this work. And so we really appreciate the questions that you asked. And, we really appreciate and value your engagement. And, I hope that, we can continue this work to help Mississippians in need all across the state because they need it. This is a crisis. But I know there's no doubt in my mind that we have the power, we have the will to make sure that we mitigate this crisis. And so I just want to thank each and every one of you. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Thanks.
That seems like a perfect way to close us out. Good night, everybody. Thank you all once again.